from New York University, Stern School of Business. I'm Jane, and today we are joined by Professor Brian Hanssen. Welcome,
Hi.
Brian.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So, Brian, currently I'm taking one of your classes, but before we go into that, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you started from, and how you came to be where you are?
Yeah, so I think there are really two big passions in my life. One is teaching and one is consulting. And frankly, over my entire life, I've really just swung back and forth between those two areas. I started out teaching in middle school and, really focused on the teaching side of things. I moved to New York, my pendulum swung to consulting, and then it went back towards, more education when I went into international development work, swung back more towards consulting and corporate work here in New York. All of that time was also an adjunct teaching at NYU. So even when I was in some of these other spaces, I kind of went back into the center where I was, back to teaching. And then, in 2015, I actually went in an entirely different direction and I went full time at NYU teaching here at Stern. And now I'm really focused more on that teaching side. Yet I still teach a class called Communication for Consulting, for example. So there are little elements that kind of still pull me back towards that other area of the pendulum, and I do work with clients pretty regularly. So teaching, consulting, and really just going back and forth in between. And yeah, I'm loving it.
Yeah, that's perfect. In one of the classes that we had, you were talking about a journey where you went to Ethiopia to help the women there, of course. And that story really struck with most of the class. I think we really changed our approach and the way we see problems, especially from a consultant's point of view. Would you mind sharing the gist of your story with us here?
Yeah. So I worked on a project where I was one of many, and I was actually one of the very few folks from outside of the country. And we were working with women who, frankly, were very underserved in the health population, particularly when it comes to HIV and AIDS. These are housemaids, women who are working in homes, being paid, hopefully being paid a wage to carry out those types of services in the home. Essentially, what we were trying to do as a group, and it was, again, a group of very, very well-intentioned and very well-educated people, we're trying to work with this population and get access specifically to them, get them healthcare, get them the needs, the information that they might need. In that process, we really focused on amazing connections between, different partnerships, trying to figure out how we can get them access to resources. We weren't necessarily thinking end user, right? Like in this case, what is the actual experience of a housemaid? How does she go about her day? What are some of the challenges she faces? Of course, we asked some of those questions at a high level, but I think the big learning was that we were still focusing on a very well-intentioned project that was supposed to give resources and education to a population that desperately needed both. And in that process, we had some shortcomings with the way that we approached it. We were not focusing on really how they live their lives. We were focusing more on how we could best support them. And I've learned a lot from that, just really focusing on, as you're going through any consulting project, what are the processes that the end users or like the different stakeholders actually go through in their, essentially daily lives, and how does that impact the recommendations and, suggestions that we're making as a consultant.
That's really great. I think most of the class will have that image of Ethiopian women lining, to get their supply of the week's worth of oil in their mind. And whenever we try to approach a problem, I'm sure that most of us will have that in mind. So thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Yeah, I'm sorry if this was I definitely could have gone into more detail, but just to keep it as high level as possible, I think just really thinking about that user-centered piece, a part of design thinking that we don't do enough, and I need to do more.
Great. So the topic the class that I'm currently studying from yourself is called Communication for Consultants.
Yeah.
What do you think from your perspective, what makes a good consultant?
Great question. I think one of the most obvious answers is that a consultant should be open to change. At any given moment, things are unpredictable. You learn new information. There are different relationships and personalities that you've got to be really well attuned to. So I think a big part of it is just being open to change and not being married to any one specific idea or process, because, things change. So that's one. But I think, number two goes back to the question that you asked before. I think a good consultant is constantly thinking about being empathetic and constantly thinking about what are different groups of people thinking, feeling, concerned about. The more you can get into the feeling and the headspace of the people that you're working with, the people that you're working for, the client, whatever it might be, the better the consultant you'll be. So I do really believe that. I think the empathy piece is so important in addition to the openness to change. And there's lots of things that we do in our class around that I won't get into now, but there's, essentially the whole class is about building out the empathy piece. And I think the third and final area, because consultants always think in threes, I think that a good consultant has the ability to take a lot of dense information and make it, easy to absorb for their audience, and really trying to connect the dots along the way. Again, by being open to change and being empathetic, you have the ability to communicate and get your ideas across in a clear and concise manner.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. So you've taught at middle school, high school, and now at higher ed. Which
Yeah.
students or which student groups do you like to teach to the most, and why?
Yeah, I'm going to get in some trouble here by answering this question, I think. Yeah, so I think I'm going to answer this in a different way, right? So instead of saying the most, I'll say what I really appreciate about each group, because I think
Nice.
that I love all of my students that I work with. I would say for the undergraduate students, I really appreciate the opportunity to work with someone who is just so interested in learning. They're like sponges. They're very excited to have experiences. They want to share their experiences. They want to be heard. It's so fun to be in a space where, with the 17, 18, 19-year-old, for example, there's just so much to both say and to hear. And they're just so open to all of that. And it's so fun to work with them.
Mm,
On the flip side of that, sometimes we'll go through a scenario in class and the response will be, well, you should just fire that person. Or,
mm,
and so it's sort of like, well, actually, that's probably not something that would happen in real life. And so sometimes those real life
mm,
realities are not
mm,
necessarily apparent in that group, or you have to really sell it. And
mm.
students are sometimes skeptical until they actually go through it for themselves.
Yeah.
I think in the MBA group, one of the things that I really appreciate is just the utter focus and determination. Every single student that comes in here is here for a reason. They've paid big money to be here, or are getting supported in some way by someone who really cares about them to be here for some reason. And they expect to go through the 2 years or however long it takes them, come out and see some sort of next step. And not to make this just about your job, but I do think that that focus and that determination on specifically where they are and where they want to go is just such a fun challenge for me,
Mm,
to be able to work with folks and hear. So many questions that I ask to an MBA student is specifically like, yeah, like, where are you now? Where do you want to go? And like, even just thinking about all the different ways that they could get there or somewhere else, is really fun. Sorry, this is
mm.
turning out to be a longer answer than you maybe expected, but one more is the EMBA student. So working with executives, I think one of my favorite pieces there, working with them, is that they've made it to these really high level positions, and they're
Mm,
looking to make big changes in their career, maybe go up one level more, advance in their management, or start a new business, whatever it may be. And, I think for them, so much of their career has been about building up walls and like making their who they are work for them, right? Essentially navigating the spaces the best they can. Those walls have been especially helpful for them to get to where they are, but may actually be limiting in where they want to go. So really working
mm,
with them to figure out how you can both be self-aware and understand what those walls may be, when are they helpful? When are they limiting? Where do you go from here? That is such an individual conversation, and I really appreciate that. Kind of in the same way that I appreciated working with the seventh grader, where again, they have their own social walls of being like in middle school and becoming a young adult. These are massive, big change times for them, and like trying to understand everyone at an individual basis is especially helpful, both I would say for like the EMBA student and for even someone who's like in the seventh grade. Although that's true for everyone, I would approach that individual approach for everyone that I work with.
As part of the NYU journey, you've also taught at NYU Shanghai.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your journey there?
Yeah. So I taught in the fall at NYU Shanghai for 4 years, and then I taught at the springtime in New York. So I would go back and forth each semester or each year to the two different campuses. Oh my gosh, what do I want to say about NYU Shanghai? I'm such a fan.
What's the biggest culture shock? I guess that's one of the first few things that I'd like to ask you.
I think the biggest culture shock for me from the institutional side, I would say, like, so I can give you my biggest culture shock of being in Shanghai and being in China. I think that's one thing. And I think institutionally, I think I really learned what it was like to be outside of a business school, because NYU Shanghai is not just, we were in a business department versus being in a business school. And so much of my time was surrounded by biologists and anthropologists and so forth. So interesting to see what faculty members were focusing on and how they approached teaching and their careers. It's quite different, frankly, than, when you're working in a professional program like a business school. So I know that's not quite your question, because I know you're really getting into the Shanghai/China aspect of being, over there. But that was my biggest culture shock from the institution side. I think for being in a new country and being in a new culture, one of the biggest shocks for me, I think, was around getting things done. I think that there was a definite disconnect for me, whether it was at school or on the metro or anywhere. To me, like, as someone who has more of a direct approach to communication, I take people sometimes at face value. If they say, yes, everything is fine, everything is fine. I found actually when I was in Shanghai that a lot of folks would say yes. And actually that did not mean yes. It was sort of like like a step towards yes, maybe, if that at all. And I originally was sort of like, oh, okay, we're good. And then I realized that just because we came to some sort of agreement on my terms did not mean that I was culturally connected into what it meant to be in agreement on the audience, the other person's terms. And so I learned a lot about, there's always that old adage that you say no 3 times and then you say yes. And I learned very quickly that the way that I was used to kind of even negotiating anything, whether it was simple or complex, required a much deeper understanding and a lot more patience on my end to recognize what is indirect about the scenario. What do I need to be thinking about? How should I be communicating? Am I being rude in my direct communication? Is that forcing a yes, even though in the end, that's not necessarily the way it's going to play out? I think that was a big change for me.
Yeah, that's really lovely. And it goes back to that empathy piece that you were talking about. Just because from our point of view, it was a yes, doesn't mean from their point of view, it was a real yes.
Exactly.
So you managed to get out of Shanghai just at the end of 2019 before the pandemic broke out. Was that a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I mean, to leave Shanghai, it was never, for me, is never a good thing. It's one of my favorite cities, and I could be there again anytime, if that were to be in the cards. But for me personally, I think it was a very good thing, because all of my family and love and relationships are all here in New York. But I would say in some ways, actually, being there in the earlier stages of the pandemic might have actually been a little bit more open. In New York, we were shut down and lots of things were closed for quite some time. And I had friends that were still living in Shanghai, and they were having a pretty normal day-to-day life. Of course, that flip-flopped in, let's say, the 2021/2022 timeframe, when we started to ease some of our requirements. And, I think the government had some pretty serious lockdowns in at least some cities, which was something that I would not have wanted to be a part of.
Okay. So during our class, you always delivered the class with this positive high energy. What's the secret to your long-lasting energy? Are there any certain rituals that you do? Any certain sports or sports drinks?
No, I don't drink coffee. I do have an espresso sometimes, because I don't even like to drink espresso. I just do it because it authorizes me to sit in a cafe with my dog. That's actually why I do it. No, to be honest, I'm very fortunate. I get a lot of energy from my external environment. And I always ask my students that, we have different motivations, right? And it doesn't just mean that you're introverted or extroverted, although actually by definition, some of this does come through. When people get up in front of a space, or even if they're running a meeting, right, you're either going to be motivated by saying everything that you wanted to say perfectly and, the way you planned it out, and that's what's going to motivate you, yeah, I nailed it, right? Or you're going to be more motivated by head nods and smiles and the general consensus that what you're saying is accepted by the people in the room. And for me, it's certainly that. It's the latter. And quite clearly, even in this interview, I don't have any challenge in my head that I wish I had said something different. I mean, we always feel that way, but at the end of the day, just knowing that you're there nodding and sort of part of the conversation is enough to motivate me to get through. And that's what teaching does for me, working with students, being able to be in front of the room. And, even if it's a low energy day, I'll bring it because I'm excited to be there. And even just being with a group of students or a group of people in general, really it gets me going. It motivates me.
Yeah. Thank you so much. One of the main things that I really got from your class was the fact that you genuinely care, not just about the future of your students, but also during our time together. So you're actually the only lecturer that would bring food to class so that we have something to eat during the night classes. And when during the spring break, when somebody was going to go to visit Disneyland, you went out of your way to share a very detailed itinerary and tips on how to make the most out of their time there. So I just wanted to say thank you for really caring for us. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate the recognition. Thanks for the thanks.
So if there was one thing that all of your students take from your class, what would that be?
I think the number for this particular class, I think it's know thyself, right? So I think so many people come to me and they say, I have this communication challenge. This is what happened, or this is what's going to happen. What should I say? And they're so worried about the words. And I think we need to take a step back when we look at our communication practices, and we need to understand more deeply the way that we prefer to communicate, what that might mean if those preferences are not honored, or if they're just not appropriate for that particular environment, how you actually deal with that conflict, even if it's an internal conflict, and what it's going to take for you to change those behaviors and get through it. That's not necessarily going to be wordsmithing or thinking about this particular message. Obviously, the words matter, and obviously wordsmithing is part of it as well, but it's so much more fundamental to that. And that's where knowing yourself and having a really solid self-awareness is absolutely the number one thing that's going to make anyone a better communicator as a consultant. That goes back to the first 3 points that I made in this interview, right? If you know yourself and understand yourself more, you can be more empathetic. You have a better sense of how to communicate. And, hopefully you have a better sense of, how to manage the change and understand how to get through some of those challenges.
Perfect. All right. right. Well, Professor Brian Hanssen, thank you again for your time. I really appreciate you making the time for us. Before we wrap up, I've prepared a few questions for a quick fire round. Would you be up for that?
Yeah, I love this. This is great.
Okay, all right. So we have 2 minutes to answer these questions.
Oh my gosh.
Ready?
And so wait, do I have one word answers or what's the
Whatever you can come up with.
okay.
Yeah? Okay,
Yeah.
are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, what's your favorite ice cream flavor?
Very clearly ooey gooey butter from Ample Hills.
Okay, what do you do for you?
I spend time with my dog in a coffee shop or sitting in a park with my dog. Anything with my dog is what I do for me.
Nice. What's your power song?
My power song is wow. My power song is likely going to come from Taylor Swift, to be honest with you.
Oh, nice. Which one? Any particular one that pops up?
Oh my gosh. I mean, it depends on what's going on. If I'm in a really, so there's actually two. These are usually more when I'm like not in a good space. So one obviously is Shake It Off. I mean, come on,
Yes.
everybody.
Yes.
There's actually another song from a whole different group that's like I don't want to sing it, but I don't know the name of it, but it's like it takes some time, things are going to get better. I love that song, so that's another one. But from a Taylor, I also think that if I'm trying to like motivate myself, if I'm going to go for a run, anything from her Reputation album is going to be absolutely perfect for that. The latest album that she put out, I mean, there's a bunch of songs in there that kind of mellow me out. Even from a power perspective, like these are all power songs in different ways, right? Like I either want to feel calmer and like feel more in control, or I want to like amp myself up, or I want to like convince myself that I'm not failing in life. Any of those, I would turn to Taylor for that.
Okay, love it. Describe the perfect day for you.
The perfect day for me is having an In-N-Out burger in Los Angeles, California. It is sitting somewhere in Santa Monica on the beach and going for a really, really long walk or a really long hike. Ideally, again, with my dog, that would be kind of nice. Any kind of, but you could translate that anyway, like any good food, outdoors, walking / hiking. I'm in. Maybe wait. Maybe some other people at some point. I'm not such a loner, right? So maybe having a drink with somebody that I care about or whatever, that's fine. But really just the hike and the food really matter to me.
Okay, sounds good. Why do you do what you do?
The world has authorized me to do it, for better or for worse. And it's definitely been, like I said, I've been gravitating to this my whole life. And whenever I pull away from it, it pulls me back. And I'm so happy that it has. I do it because every day I wake up and, at least knock on wood, someone says, please come to Stern and please come teach. And it's what I mean, I would do it for free. I really would. Please don't tell anyone that, but I would. So yeah, no, I mean, why do I do what I do? I love being surrounded by people who challenge me intellectually and who have so much to say. And it's so fun to be around everyone here.
Perfect. And the last question is, what do you want to be remembered for?
I want to be remembered that I wrote an email to someone about Disney, honestly. Right, because I think that's just so much more interesting than communicating a particular framework or theory in a good way, or they really helped me get my next job or my interview. I mean, it's the little things like that. I actually really appreciate you brought that up before, because I remember anyone in my life more for those little things than I mean, obviously you appreciate the big things too, but it's like, it's those moments where someone either goes out of their way or just does something unexpected and you're like, that's cool. I would love that.
Yeah, perfect. All right. Well, Brian, thank you so much for your time again. And it's been a real pleasure learning from you. I've learned a bunch, but I also had a lot of fun during it. So thank you.
Thank you for having me. And it's been really great to chat. And someday I want to interview you as well, because there's so much more to be said.
Okay, sounds good. So thank you so much for listening. If you enjoy our conversation, please press the like button, comment, or share with your friends. In the meantime, don't forget to press the subscribe button so that the next video will go straight to your box. See you next time. So Brian, obviously I'm currently taking Hello from New York University Stern School of Business. I'm Jane, and today we are joined by
More in the consulting space. Jane,